His name was Matthew Grinnell. His wife, Rose French, and he were married in England in 1615, coming to America in the early 1630s. While living in Massachusetts and nearby Portsmouth, Rhode Island, their final home, they had 3 children, Matthew, Daniel, and Mary. I'm going to tell you the story about the remarkable Grinnell family, starting from Matthew and Rose. Matthew and Rose's 3 children remained in Rhode Island, where they raised children of their own. Church records, recorded deeds, and cemetery records indicated that the first 3 generations of Grinnells remained in Portsmouth or moved to nearby East Greenwich and Little Compton, Rhode Island. The migration of Grinnells to other states followed the migration of all Americans as the country slowly grew. Later generations produced at least 55 known Grinnells who served in the American Revolution and 4 who served in the United States Congress. Where there are presently over 30,000 known Grinnells dating to Matthew and Rose, this story will present a cameo of some of the more famous in the family tree. The 3rd generation Daniel Grinnell, son of Matthew and Rose's son Daniel, married the granddaughter of John Alden and Priscilla Mullins, who arrived in America on the Mayflower. Their daughter, Elizabeth Alden, married William Peabody, and their 12th child, Lydia, at age 16, married Daniel Grinnell in 1683 in Little Compton, Rhode Island. Daniel was a miller by trade, but he was also known as Sergeant Daniel Grinnell. As a sergeant, he either was in the military or was a town constable. He and Lydia had 12 children. Following in Daniel's line, in the 8th generation of Grinnells, is Josiah Bushnell Grinnell. I'll let J.B., as he was known, tell his own story.
I was born in New Haven, Vermont in 1821. Josiah was a name given to me in honor of a noted clergyman of the town, Josiah Hopkins, while the second name, Bushnell, was given jointly for the Reverend Jedediah Bushnell and Horace Bushnell of Hartford. At age 23, I entered the Theological Seminary of Auburn, New York. After leading congregational churches in the 1840s and 1850s in Union Village, New York, Washington, D.C., and New York City, I developed throat trouble. One of my congregation in New York was the famed editor, Horace Greeley. He knew of my throat problem and advised that I go west, young man, go west. I took his advice and I moved to Iowa. There I was busy. Knowing that the Rock Island Railroad was to locate a station at this point, I laid out the town that later on the townsfolk named Grinnell, Iowa. Here I built my church. Detesting liquor in all its forms, I ran for and was elected to the Iowa State Senate in 1856. I was also elected to the 38th and the 39th U.S. Congress. Not being one to laziness, I became involved with bringing the railroad to different communities in Iowa, laying out spurs that would bring goods from the east. I was elected president of 3 railroads at different times: the Central Iowa Railroad, Grinnell and Montezuma Railroad, and the Iowa City and English Valley Railroad.
Perhaps the most important single accomplishment of my life was rebuilding the college in Grinnell, Iowa, that eventually was to bear my name.
Iowa College in Davenport moved to Grinnell in 1861 during the Civil War. J.B. was instrumental in bringing the college here. One of the 2 original buildings burned to the ground in 1871, and a tornado destroyed the campus in 1882. During this time of poverty and devastation, the college struggled for survival. After the cyclone, J.B. went to the east to raise funds from old capitalist friends for rebuilding. He collected more than $40,000 to rebuild the campus. His efforts had helped construct 3 new buildings, completed in 1884. In addition, he collected food, clothing, and building materials for the citizens of Grinnell. The college began to gain fame, first in academics and then in athletics. Today, Grinnell College is renowned as one of the finest liberal arts colleges in the United States. J.B. married at age 31. He and his wife, Julia Chapin, had 4 children, all born in Iowa. He died in his 70th year in his adopted state of Iowa. Captain Henry Grinnell was born in New York and raised in Oakland County, Michigan. As a young man, he spent 12 years on the high seas as a merchant and whaling boat sailor and captain, and as a hero to his men. His first voyage was aboard the Winslow, one of the largest whaling ships then afloat. On a return trip from the Pacific with a full cargo of oil and bone, a terrible gale was encountered in the Atlantic. The gales caused the cargo to roll about and pound the vital parts of the ship. He saved his crewmates from the storm near Cape Hope by tying a rope to his body during the storm and cutting the lanyards to the sails to help right the ship.
Slowly, I made my way along the windward side of the ship. I don't know how I ever withstood those torrents, but I seemed to have superhuman strength. I never gave up, but kept gaining an inch at a time until I finally reached the rigging. I never drew a knife across a rope as quick as I did then, until everyone was cut and the sails fell away limp and useless.
The ship, now freed from the influence of the strong winds, eventually sailed out of the storm. Grinnell's act of daring was long afterwards talked about at every sailor's resort. While on a whaling voyage on the ship Charles, bound for Manila, he saved himself after a whale smashed his small harpoon boat.
With a quick splashing of the water, the big fellow hit my boat, with his huge nose smashing it to splinters. How did I feel? About as any man would feel in a railroad smash-up. The whole thing came so suddenly that the first I realized was that I was going skyward with the splinters of the boat. As soon as I struck the water, I found that I had been badly hurt. I could not move my legs. I paddled like a good fellow to keep afloat until help arrived. Both my legs were broken, but I soon recovered and was as strong as ever.
During Henry's last voyage, as captain of the Pantheon, his ship became wrecked on a reef on one of the Fox Islands in the South Atlantic. He saved his crew from the shipwreck, for they were castaways for 3 months, by making tents out of the ship's sails and by rationing the food saved from the ship. The island was barren, so there was no food except that which had been saved. After 3 months, their supplies were almost gone. After what seemed a lifetime, their distress signal was spotted by an off-course ocean liner, and they were saved. Presently, he took a job as a carpenter at Fort Yuma, a military post in the Apache Territory. He immediately took an interest in an event that happened 2 years before his arrival. In the spring of 1851, a family of 7 named Oatman was endeavoring to reach California via the old Santa Fe route. Their wagon was sighted near the Colorado River east of what is now Needles, California, by the Apaches, who attacked and killed the parents and 4 of their 7 children, leaving a son, Lorenzo, for dead. Their 2 daughters, Olive, 12, and Mary Ann, 7, were taken captive by the Apaches. After 2 years, the Apaches sold the girls to the Mojaves, who lived 400 miles north of Fort Yuma. Olive and Mary Ann's chins were marked with indelible blue cactus tattoos to proclaim their status as slaves. There were rumors of white girls living with the Mojaves. Henry intensified his interest in the girls. He was friendly with the Yuma Indians, and one in particular named Francisco. One night in his tent, Henry challenged Francisco.
There are 2 girls living among the Mojaves and Apaches, and you know it, and we know that you know it.
Henry then took a copy of the Los Angeles Star and told Francisco to listen. Then he read,
If the girls are not delivered in so many days, there will be a huge army sent to the rescue who will annihilate every last one of the Indians if they do not release the captives.
At that point, Francisco admitted that there was 1 white girl among the Mojaves, but 1 had died. Henry provided a ransom for the girl from his personal account. Olive tells her story of this release.
A Yuma Indian named Francisco arrived at the Mojave camp to set my release. They had painted my face and feet and hands of a dun, dingy color. This they told me they did to deceive Francisco, and that I must not talk to him in American, that I must talk to him in another language. When we were alone, I spoke to him in broken English and told him the truth. He became angry and jumped from his seat in a perfect rage. He then broke forth upon them with one of the most vehement addresses I ever heard. Days passed until they finally agreed to release me. Before leaving, I went to the grave of my sister, Mary Ann, who had died of starvation 3 years before, and I took a last look of the little mound marking the resting place of my sister, who had come with me to that lonely exile.
Commander Burke of Fort Yuma wrote to the surviving brother Lorenzo that a young woman calling herself Olive Oatman had been recently brought to the fort by a Yuma Indian. When Lorenzo Oatman arrived at Fort Yuma to become reunited with Olive, they met, they wept, and they embraced each other in the tenderest manner, but for nearly 1 hour not one word could either speak. Olive left Fort Yuma with Lorenzo and eventually moved to Oregon with a cousin. She married and moved to Texas in 1865. Henry Grinnell was singularly responsible for the release of Olive, and in her book, Olive gives him the credit for her release. In 1867, Henry returned to Michigan, married in 1869, and had one son, Henry Miller Grinnell, in 1871. Henry died in 1901. George Bird Grinnell was born in Brooklyn, New York, and lived most of his life in Manhattan. However, after graduating from Yale, he made a name for himself in the West. He was an explorer, big game hunter, researcher, naturalist, ethnologist, editor, author, and conservationist. He developed an intimate relationship with the Audubon family and developed his interest in the West. He made his first expedition to the West in 1870. He was accepted by the Pawnee Indians and accompanied them on a buffalo hunt in 1872. He wrote stories of his experiences with the Pawnee, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet Indians, and his stories first appeared in Forest and Stream magazine in 1873. By 1875, he had accompanied General Custer on an expedition and had experienced firsthand the slaughter of wild animals on other expeditions to Yellowstone National Park. His writing now turned to official protests of animal slaughter and Indian abuse. By 1876, he had joined the staff of Forest and Stream, where his articles appeared, and later he became its editor-in-chief and finally its owner. In June 1880, he received his Ph.D. from Yale. As a conservationist and naturalist, he founded the original Audubon Society, which later became the National Audubon Society. The first Audubon magazine was published in 1887. On a packing trip in 1885 in northwestern Montana with a Blackfeet Indian scout, he first entered the St. Mary's region of what was to become Glacier National Park. He later met James Willard Schultz, a prolific writer of stories about the Blackfeet Indians and who had married a Blackfeet woman. The Blackfeet named him Apakuni. Dr. Grinnell also became a member of the Blackfeet tribe with the name Pinotoyi Chimokan. The friendship between Schultz and Dr. Grinnell became very strong, and Schultz's stories appeared in the Forest and Stream magazine. They wrote to each other almost monthly, using their Blackfeet names in their salutations. Bird Grinnell continued his exploration of the Glacier National Park territory, and with Schultz named many of the features of the park, using names to honor the Blackfeet tribe. His maps were the first maps of the territory and were used by the National Geologic Service. He lobbied that the glacier area be preserved as a national park, and in 1910 the U.S. government made it official. The government honored Dr. Grinnell by naming 4 features after him: Grinnell Glacier, Grinnell Lake, Grinnell Trail, and Grinnell Mountain. In 1925 he was awarded the Theodore Roosevelt Medal by President Calvin Coolidge. The accompanying citation read in part,
"You lived among the Indians. You became a member of the Blackfeet tribe. Your studies of their language and customs are authoritative. In the Yellowstone Park, you prevented the exploitation and therefore the destruction of the natural beauty. The Glacier National Park is peculiarly your monument."
He wrote numerous books written about the Pawnee, Cheyenne, and Blackfeet Indian tribes, beginning in 1888 and continuing into the 1930s. Margaret Mead stated,
Of all the books written about Indians, none comes closer to their everyday life than Grinnell's classic monograph of the Cheyenne. Reading it, one can smell the buffalo grass and the wood fires, feel the heavy morning dew on the prairie.
George Bird Grinnell married Elizabeth Curtis in 1902 when he was 53. They had no family, and he died in New York in 1938. Almira Huldah Grinnell is another remarkable person. After her education was complete in 1841, at age 18, Huldah married Louis Strong Stearns. After 2 sons were born, their daughter, Hattie, was born in 1856. Her husband, Louis, volunteered to go to Port Royal, South Carolina during the Civil War to help in the protection of freed slaves. Social workers were recruited through the Freedmen's Aid Society of the Methodist Episcopal Church of New York City. Huldah and Hattie were planning to join Louis. However, he died suddenly, and Huldah decided to carry on his work. In November 1869, she received an appointment from the society to open a school for Negroes in East Tennessee. She knew full well the persecution she and her daughter would receive from the white population at Morristown, where the school was to be. The governor of Tennessee provided for protection from mob violence in Morristown, and it was the local citizens who protected Huldah and Hattie. She taught in the school for over 28 years, and in 1898 she published a book entitled A Highway in the Wilderness, in which she described her experiences in establishing the school. The school she started for slave children and their parents became Morristown College, a 2-year college with total enrollment of 200 students. Huldah died in Knoxville, Tennessee in 1903. Joseph Grinnell was born in Indian Territory in Oklahoma. His father, Dr. Fordyce Grinnell, was medical director at an Indian agency. Joseph lived in the Dakotas among the Ogallala Sioux Indians, where his brother and sister were born. At age 8, he moved with his family to Pasadena, California. There he graduated from high school and attended Throop Polytechnic Institute, now known as Caltech. As a hobby, Joseph studied the birds of the Pasadena area, making a collection of all that could be found. In 1897, at age 20, he gave a report to the Academy of Sciences on the birds of Santa Barbara, San Nicolas, and San Clemente Island. The report was published by the Academy. While attending Stanford, he supported himself by teaching zoology and botany at the Palo Alto High School. During the summer sessions in 1901 and 1902, he instructed ornithology at Stanford. Now married to Huldah Wood, a direct Mayflower descendant of John Howland, his family settled in Berkeley. In 1913, Joseph received a doctorate of zoology. He returned to Throop Institute to teach biology. Anne M. Alexander met Joseph at Throop. She had the vision to create a museum of vertebrate zoology dedicated to the pursuit of pure science, and her vision coincided with Joseph's ambition to establish a systematic research center on the West Coast that would be as important as the natural history museums of the day. In 1908, a museum of vertebrate zoology at the University of California was founded, and Joseph was appointed the first director. He served in this position until his death in 1939. For 33 years, he was editor of a scientific journal, The Condor, published by Stanford University. His theory of the ecological niche, published in 1924, has proved to be one of the organizing principles of nature. Under his name, 554 scientific articles were published, the first at the age of 16. He was instrumental in shaping the philosophy of the national park system, and his commitment to wildlife protection and conservation was borne out most visibly through his research in Yosemite National Park during the first 2 decades of the 20th century. Dr. Grinnell's work has caused some birds, mammals, and insects to be named for or by him because of his tremendous research in identifying wildlife. Captain Cornelius Grinnell married Sylvia Ann Howland, another Mayflower descendant, in 1785. They were the parents of 9 children, and 4 of their sons became famous in their own rights. As a boy, Cornelius left his home in Little Compton, Rhode Island, and moved to New Bedford, Massachusetts. His new hometown was just getting a good start as a whaling port, and Cornelius soon went to sea. He served on both land and sea in the American Revolution. Early in the war, he was taken prisoner at sea. After being exchanged, he served in the Army. By 1791, he was back on the seas as first mate on the Rebecca, and when the captain became ill, he took charge. He soon became a captain in his own right. He is reputed to be the first captain to double Cape Horn. By 1796, he had accumulated a large investment, so he retired from the sea to manage his affairs. In business with his brother-in-law, William Howland, he built ships and engaged in commerce, in flour, corn, iron, and other provisions, and engaged in commercial shipping. He served as a director on several bank boards. He died in New Bedford in 1850. Cornelius Grinnell, Jr. lived most of his life in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Like his father, he was a partner in business. As a young man, he moved to New York City to be a partner in a commission business. Later, he was with the family firm of Grinnell and Minturn, managing their fleet of sailing ships, the Swallowtail Line. After that, he returned to New Bedford and served in the Massachusetts legislature, then joined a brother-in-law in constructing lighthouses. He and his first wife, Eliza Russell, were married in 1808, and they had 10 children. Cornelius Jr. died at a young age of 44 in New Bedford. His grandson Frederick started one of the major corporations in America. Frederick Grinnell received his early education at Friends Academy in New Bedford, and then at age 16 he entered Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in Troy, New York. He graduated 3 years later in 1855 at the head of his class. He was an engineer and a genius when it came to inventing mechanical devices. In the fall of that year, he started as a mechanical engineer for the Jersey City Locomotive Works. After helping to construct the Burlington and Missouri River Railroad, he worked for the Corliss Steam Engine Company. In January 1865, he became general manager of the Jersey City Locomotive Works. In 1869, Frederick purchased controlling interest in the Providence Steam and Gas Pipe Company. With his experience in water systems and fire equipment, he became interested in an automatic fire extinguisher invented and patented by Henry Parmalee of New Haven, Connecticut. Parmalee agreed to have Frederick's company manufacture and install the sprinklers and the sprinkler systems. Frederick was not pleased with the sensitivity of Parmalee's sprinklers, so he purchased the patent from them and shortly thereafter began making improvements. In 1881, Frederick invented and secured patents on a heat-sensitive automated sprinkler that completely revolutionized the fire protection system throughout the world, and by the late 1880s, he had installed over 10,000 sprinkler systems in the mills and factories of New England. The Providence Steam and Gas Pipe Company was the predecessor to the General Fire Extinguisher Company, which became famous throughout the world when it adopted the name of its owner, the Grinnell Corporation, in 1892. 20 years after his death in 1905, Frederick's son Russell became president of the Grinnell Corporation. Joseph Grinnell was the second son of Cornelius Grinnell and Sylvia Ann Howland. Born in 1788, he was later educated at the New Bedford Academy. After a short period in business with his father, he went to New York in 1810. He engaged in the shipping business with an uncle, John Howland, in the firm of Howland and Grinnell. But the War of 1812 brought disaster to this firm when their ships were seized and condemned. In 1815, with a cousin, the firm of Fish and Grinnell was started, becoming a very successful commission business. He eventually returned to New Bedford, where he contracted to build 2 ships, the Oneida and the George Washington. He was bank president of the Marine Bank for 46 years and director and president of the Boston and Providence Railroad for 5. He caused the construction of the New Bedford and Taunton Railroads, of which he was the first president. He became active in politics, rising rapidly to become a U.S. congressman for 4 terms, beginning in 1843. While in office, he and other members of the House of Representatives sponsored a bill to make postage in the United States a flat rate of 5 cents for a letter anywhere in the country, for the ventilation of ships, and hence the disappearance of ship fever, and for the establishment of lifeboats at various stations upon the coasts. Risks and hazards of the whaling industry were becoming greater in the mid-19th century, and a few of the wealthy men of New Bedford, including Joseph Grinnell, realized that another industry was needed. In 1846, a charter was obtained for a cotton factory in New Bedford. Cotton was transported from the south by ship and railroad. New Bedford had a wharf, and 2 trains ran in and out each day, stopping at a station located on the outskirts of town. The first mill was located by a wharf used by the railroads, and the Wamsutta Mill No. 1, named after the son of an Indian chief, was born. Because of the high price of everything associated with the cotton industry, Joseph initially declined to be associated with the mill. However, in 1848, material and machinery became cheaper. Then he came forward and urged the erection of a factory for the manufacture of cotton cloth. A charter of $160,000 was subscribed with the understanding that he should be the president. The mill prospered under his leadership. Today, the Wamsutta brand is associated with fine cotton products in the United States. Although married twice, Joseph had no children of his own, instead raising a niece who he and his wife Sarah loved. He lived until he was 97. Henry William Grinnell was born in 1799 in New Bedford, Massachusetts. Known as a merchant and philanthropist, he founded the American Geographical and Statistical Society. Like his brothers, he graduated from the New Bedford Academy and went to New York City, where he joined his brother Joseph in the firm Fish and Grinnell. Later on, he was a partner in Grinnell, Minturn and Company with his brothers Cornelius and Moses Hicks. In 1822, he married Sarah Minturn, his partner's sister. They had 9 children. During the mid-19th century, there was intense interest by many explorers to locate a northwest passage to the Orient in the Baffin region of the Northwest Territories, near Greenland. One of these explorers was Sir John Franklin of England. In 1845, he was making his 3rd trip to this region on his ships Erebus and Terror. There were 105 men involved, and all became lost. When not heard from for months, expeditions were organized to search for and find the ships and crew. Sir Franklin's wife had appealed for help, a bill that had been introduced in the U.S. Congress to outfit an expedition to rescue the explorers failed. Henry took matters into his own hands. He was the main financier of a rescue mission in 1850. He outfitted 2 of his own vessels, the Advance and the Rescue, and offered them to the U.S. government for the attempt. Many months of search under terrible conditions result in not finding Sir John or his ships. Henry's ships returned to New York in 1851. In 1853, a second attempt was made, also sponsored by Henry and also unsuccessful. He aided in 2 other explorations of the Arctic, the Hayes Arctic Expedition in 1860 and the Polaris Expedition in 1861. During this time, 2 pieces of land in the Arctic were named after Henry Grinnell. The commander and the senior medical officer, who had both been on the 1850 and 1853 expeditions, are credited for naming Grinnell Land, a portion of Ellesmere Island near Greenland, and Grinnell Peninsula on Devon Island, just south of Ellesmere Island. The terrain is typically Arctic, with tundra, below 0 temperatures, and 24 hours of sunlight during the summer. Henry died in New York City in his 75th year. Moses Hick Grinnell, like his brothers, was successful in his own right. He moved to New York to join his brothers in Grinnell, Minturn and Company. In 1839, he was elected to the U.S. Congress. In 1869, he was collector of the port of New York. He became president of the New York City Chamber of Commerce and was a member of the original Central Park Commission. Possibly his real forte was as a real estate developer. He was responsible for much of the early success of Key West, Florida, where a street is named for him. Key West was often used as a safe haven for the shipping industry during New England's harsh winter season. While still in New York in 1851, Moses Hicks and his company purchased the American clipper ship, the Flying Cloud, which was the masterpiece of builder Donald Mackay. Built in Boston, it acquired a high reputation during the gold rush in California by making the passage from New York around Cape Horn to San Francisco in the record time of 89 days and 21 hours, a full 30 days faster than the average voyage. The ship served Grinnell, Minturn and Company well during its lifetime. It carried goods between the United States and England, Australia, Hong Kong, and many South American countries. Moses Hicks married twice. First to Susan Russell, sister of Cornelius's wife, Eliza. After her death, he married Julia Irving, niece of Washington Irving. Moses Hicks died at age 74 in New York City. Ira Leonard Grinnell and Clayton Albert Grinnell were born in the middle of the 19th century in Upper New York State. When their parents died suddenly in 1865, the boys went to live with an older married sister, Sarah, in Michigan. In 1872, Ira started selling sewing machines in Ann Arbor, Michigan, on a door-to-door basis, gradually adding musical merchandise. In 1879, he and Clayton opened a store in Ann Arbor. Soon another store was started in Ypsilanti, a suburb of Detroit. In 1882, their brother, Herbert Balcom, joined the company for a while, and during this time the headquarters was established in Detroit. At this time they named their company Grinnell Brothers Music House. Herbert left the company and moved his family to Alabama, where he died at age 36. His poor family returned to Michigan, and Herbert's son, Jay, nephew of the founding Grinnell brothers, was to play a prominent role in saving the company from bankruptcy when he was appointed president by the court during the Depression. Grinnell brothers carried everything from guitars to large-size organs and boasted the largest selection of sheet music in the world. In 1885, they began to manufacture their own pianos in Holly, Michigan, a suburb of Detroit. They manufactured player pianos, upright pianos, and concert grand pianos. Their upright pianos rivaled the Steinway as the finest ever made. Their pianos were found in music studios, college music departments, and the homes of well-known musicians, dancers, and musical artists of the time. In a business partnership with RCA, the first TV in the Midwest with the Grinnell brand name was displayed and demonstrated in 1939 in the Detroit headquarters store on Woodward Avenue. Each year, Grinnell Brothers Music House supplied the pianos and organs at the State of Michigan Music Festival, which was held in the largest and finest theaters of Detroit. At the peak, the company owned 40 stores in Michigan, one in Toledo, Ohio, and one in Windsor, Ontario, Canada. Sons, nephews, cousins, all with the Grinnell surnames served as presidents, directors, and officers until the company was sold in 1955. Ira died in 1921, and Clayton in 1927, both in Michigan.